Well, thanks for coming out on a rainy night. Really appreciate it, folks. It's an important meeting. It's our annual meeting, and we have an action-packed agenda. But we do have our yearly elections at this time, so I really thank you for coming and supporting the club. And if you have an interest in serving in the club, we're certainly interested in talking with you after the meeting. We can talk. If you're so inclined and want to get more involved, we're always looking for officers and members at large for the next session. So please grab me or any of the officers that are here today. So as I said, it's action-packed. Kelly Beatty's here. He's going to speak about our telescope loaner program, and I'll have him go into much more detail about what his intentions are there. And then a quick change in terms of discussion. He'd like to talk about Starlink instead of Stonehenge. So if you wanted to come hear about Stonehenge, I'm really sorry, but you can take it out on the telescope. All right? And
I can tell you about Stonehenge.
But before I go any further, I want to thank Bruce Berger for picking up the refreshments tonight. It's a
And Kelly for actually carrying the shopping bag.
All right, Glenn's not here tonight, so he asked me if I would do it. Of course, I'll get up here and talk to you guys. Let's see. Oh yeah, look at this. I hope you guys have all been out observing. We finally got some clear weather lately. And before we get into the stuff that's up and coming, I just want to remind you that most Fridays and most Saturday nights, especially if it's clear and it's the dark of the moon, the clubhouse is open for business. And you're more than welcome to come on up and observe with us. You can bring telescopes of your own, or you can just observe with the scopes that are on hand. And we had just a full house last Saturday night. It was fabulous. A lot of folks were imaging, but a lot of folks were observing as well. And we looked at some nice deep sky objects. We looked at Jupiter. The moon was out. Even the moon. We looked at the moon. I commandeered Steve Clougherty's 18-inch scope, and I always like to scoop up a few geostationary satellites to entertain the crowd. So there was a trio of them parked off the east coast of Brazil that we were looking at on Saturday night. So you're more than welcome to come up and join us at the clubhouse.
How do you know that they're there?
Well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of them up there.
Tracking chips. Right behind the left ear.
That's right behind here, right? The deal is you can go on CalSky and look for their altitude and their azimuth. The way I like to find them, if you don't mind me going into it a little bit, is to have like waypoints in the sky, like asterisms that I can find that are along what I call the corridor. Here at 42 degrees north latitude, that ring of that arc of geostationary satellites is at -6 degrees and about 30 arc minutes. So. And that's due to parallax. Most of them are parked over the equator, but because we're north of the equator, we see them a little bit below. So I look for groups of stars that are easy to find and are right about the right spot in the sky, and then you just kind of follow along, and you'll sweep them up. They first of all look like they're satellites drifting through the star field, when in reality they're sitting perfectly still, and it's the star field that's drifting by them.
So just turn your drive off.
You should shut the drive off. They're typically 10th to 13th magnitude because they're 23,000 miles away and they're pretty small. And so, but you can find them and they're kind of cool to look at because it's just they're just kind of neat to look at. If you're into that sort of thing. Anyway. I kind of like to look at it. They were cool. And if you come up, I'll show you how to find them. They're easy. So anyway, here's what's coming up on June 16th. In the evening, Jupiter pairs up with the near full moon. You won't be looking at anything else. You might as well go out and look at the moon and Jupiter. I was looking at Jupiter last night. After the fourth goal was scored, I was like, I've had enough. I'm going to go outside and see what I know when I'm going to get outside. And the moon looked nice, but also Jupiter's red spot was visible. It's a little bit smaller than it was last year, but it's certainly still orangey red, and it's relatively easy to see. I'll continue to discuss emails when you can go out there and look at it yourself. I was using a 10-inch scope, stopped down to about 90 millimeters. It was quite a view. It looked pretty cool. Anyway, June 18th, 40 minutes after sunset, Mercury and Mars less than half degree apart, low in the west-northwest. Saturn is close to the winged gibbous moon. Summer solstice is on Friday, the 21st. Mercury is at greatest eastern elongation, low in the west-northwestern sky. Might be a little hard to find, but that you can go out and look at that. If you've got the cash and you got the airfare, it's July 2nd. There's a total eclipse in Chile and Argentina. Earth is at aphelion on July 4th, and Saturn is opposition on the 9th. So those are some up-and-coming events. The rings of Saturn this year are tilted about 24 degrees to our line of sight, which means that when you look at Saturn through the telescope, it looks like Saturn. And so people, if you're showing your neighbors and friends, they'll be happy to look at Saturn through your telescope. And I guess that's all I have to say about that. Anyway, I don't think. Oh, you know what else he's got? The object of the month. Well, let's not forget that. So the Observers Challenge, Roger Ivester's Observers Challenge, this month is NGC 5377. It's a barred spiral galaxy in Canes Venatici. It's it's right here. It's over here. Right about in here somewhere. It's actually fairly faint. We looked at it on Saturday night through John Bishop's 8-inch scope, and you could see it as a round but very faint, low surface brightness. It's probably going to be a bit of a challenge as compared to the galaxies from last month, 4036 and 4041. Those are relatively easy. You should go check those out. They're pretty neat. But check it out if you can. Like I said, it's and there it is, and it's in here. So.
Mara, is that your picture?
Yeah. All right.
Oh, thank you, Mara. That's nice. Very nice. Anything more? Oh, there's a sketch. I don't know who took that image.
Yeah, it looks like Doug Paul's.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Doug Paul.
Doug Paul, right. So that's what I thought. Doug Paul's image, and that's probably Glenn's sketch.
It is.
Okay. So check it out.
Great.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
I'll be right back.
So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Kelly Beatty.
Thank you, everyone. And while I'm getting my computer set up here, I am going down for the eclipse, and I found out just within the last couple of days that we're going to have some special guests with our group. It's a crew from ABC News, because we have a site that actually has really good internet, and so they are going to be streaming live during the eclipse. So if you want to see what the solar eclipse looks like, it'll be upside down because it's in South America. But
Which way is up?
well,
Is everything going to follow your trumpets?
yeah, I think I'm all set here.
Which way did trumpets?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about two things. This talk actually had its genesis back in March. Bruce Berger and I have, on rare occasions, we're both members of the New Hampshire Club, and we have gone up to participate in their library telescope program mod parties, where they modify telescopes that are then placed in libraries around the state. And I came back from one in March, and I was talking to Rich and Tom about this, and just sort of wondering out loud why ATMoB hadn't really gotten involved with this, and they basically said, well, no one had really made a case for it, why don't you? So here I am. And so I'm going to talk to you. My hope tonight is to have a relatively short discussion by me, a presentation by me, and then we can have an more open-ended discussion about it. So the idea for this started in 2008 when Mark Stobridge of the New Hampshire Club decided to modify a small telescope for his local public library. And it was quite successful. This was 2008. And he started talking this up with the New Hampshire Club, which, for those of you who might know, they're probably a third to a quarter of the size of ATMoB. And sorry to say, they run rings around us in terms of outreach activities. We do plenty, but they do plenty on steroids. They have lots of great events. And so I wasn't surprised that the club was as active with the Library Telescope program as it came to be. And it really grew. It was actually the first one in the country. And now this small club has placed more than 100 telescopes in libraries throughout the state of New Hampshire. And so this is what one of the events that Bruce and I went to. This is the team that does the modification of these telescopes, which I'll talk to you about in a second. And it's a very fun kind of gathering, and we'll get back to that in a second. So, let's see, this is supposed to work as an animation. Let's see if it does. The kings of the hill right now is the St. Louis Astronomical Society. This is one build party involving, I think it was 60 telescopes at once. You can see all the boxes here lined up, ready to process. They now...
Did they have to buy them?
I'm sorry?
Did they buy them or don't?
So the answer is that you usually you get the library to commit to a telescope, and they pay the funds for you to prepare it for them. Or the club will find donors, individual donors, or sometimes the club will actually just donate the scope, depending on the circumstance. Now in 2013, when Bruce and I first got involved with this, there was no presence in Massachusetts. Bruce and Rick Shooter each donated a telescope that are in Chelmsford. So we have 2 libraries in Chelmsford, and there's one of these telescopes in each one. And I actually brought one of them here tonight for you to take a close look at. But in the meantime, the Aldrich Astronomical Society out in the western part of the state has really gotten involved with this. And there's a new website, librarytelescope.org, where you can find out, this has now really been embraced by the Astronomical League. It's a national and actually an international movement. And they have almost 100 telescopes in the western 2/3 of the state, as far east as right at the edge of 495. And Rich has had a couple of exchanges, or at least one exchange with some of the folks there. And I guess he broached the notion of ATMoB getting involved, and they were none too pleased because right now they have a monopoly in the state. And I think there's plenty of room for carving up the state, because there's no penetration in the immediate greater Boston area, for example. Beverly, yes, and there's even one in Brookline too. Right, but not in Boston, not in the North Shore, the South Shore, so to speak. All right, so I went up to this build session this past March, and Pete Smith, who is the coordinator there, gave me a little rundown. So this is a 9-minute long video which sort of gives you an overview of the whole process. So this is a panorama of the rooms.
4 of them NHAS is going to be donating to libraries, and 4 of them libraries actually pay for in advance. Each time we do a mod party, we do them 3 times a year if we have demand. We get libraries to either pay for them directly. Sometimes the friends of the library will pay for them. Sometimes let other people pay and donate scopes, and then NHAS donates whatever they can each year as well. Historically, we donated 2 scopes a year. This year we've got a little bit more, so we're donating 4 this year.
And how much does a donation cost?
So the materials to get everything cost between $325 and $350 just for the materials. We have stabled everything at $325. So if we have to spend a little bit more than $325, we eat that cost.
Okay, so what do you do to them?
We take these scopes, we pull the mirrors off, we get rid of all this hardware, we end up pulling out the screws from inside the mirror mount assembly and put on a nylon lock nut on the outside, so these mirrors can't be adjusted very easily. We put decals on. There's a moon mat that goes here. A big do not look at the sun, because this little tiny one that Orion puts on is kind of hard to see. We put another plaque down here at the bottom that dedicates this scope to the library and talks about NHAS a little bit. We put another decal on here that talks about the powers of the eyepiece and what the magnification means. We add a small fanny pack to the side. Inside the fanny pack we'll have an instruction book on how to use a telescope, a nice book from
Audubon. He stumbled here. It's Audubon Guide to the Sky.
Good Lord. A nice astronomy book that talks about the constellations and where to find, what to find in the night sky in different seasons. We'll show you that later. Up here on the eyepiece, we put in a zoom lens here. The scope comes with two small eyepieces. We don't include those. Put in a zoom lens. We replace these two screws with button head Allen screws so they can't easily be removed. The easy finder that goes up here has a cell battery on the bottom side of it. We take out that cell battery, put a battery pack, AA battery pack on the side of it, and a special assembly of wires and a plate to replace that cell battery. It makes it easier for them to get and replace the batteries. Down here, where the cover goes on, so they can look at the moon easily, we put a small 2-inch hole in the end plate, and we put strings on. Everything that's removable from the scope, like the end plate, this little moon cap that we put on, the eyepiece cover, all attached by strings, so that really nothing can be lost from the scope when we're using it. And on the mirror mount nut, so the mirror assembly comes off like this from the telescope. We remove the hardware. There's the hardware screws that used to be in here. We'll take that out, do not reuse it. Pop this guy off. Nice kind of looks like that. So we'll pop this guy off. Underneath this will be the mirror itself. It'll be sitting like that.
So that's the mirror cell.
Yep, so there's the mirror cell. We'll take the mirror cell off. Put that off to one side. Then these screws that are in here, we take them out and throw them away as well. We'll come back in with longer screws. Put longer screws back in that same place. And you can probably see some epoxy here. We actually epoxy these in because on the other end of this, we're going to have a nylon lock nut. And that's what we use when we initially collimate them. We don't want this screw spinning around inside the cell. I'll just lift that up a little bit. So he's already got the new screws in, and he's putting the end cover back on. And these 3 screw holes that he's lining up to, we actually drilled those out a little bit larger than the original. And now he's putting on the nylon lock nuts, the washer. Right now he's just putting these nylon lock nuts on hand tight. And then later on, when we do the collimation, these will all be tightened down, collimated. There will be collimated. That's it up.
Okay, great.
So here he's putting the mirror back in. One thing to note is he's keeping the screwdriver down low, so that if he slips a little bit, it's not going to scratch across the mirror. We don't want to lay that mirror flat and do those screws. And when we take them out, the same thing. That's that there. See this. Actually, that's good. So here we have the original Easy Finder from Orion. This side used to have a sticker like this on it. We peel that sticker off, so we have a nice flush surface here. We take a AA battery box and solder on these brass plates to the end of each wire. And then on one of them, we put on this 1/8 thick rubber piece. I actually buy them in sheets, and I have a little 3/4 inch hole punch. Just punch out these little circles. We cut a little notch down the bottom of the rubber piece. And then use super glue to glue the rubber onto just this red contact. Just hold that like that. So now this black wire is going to slide down underneath there. The rubber will go on top. The red wire goes on top. Positive is on top. negatives on bottom.
So you're making a replacement for where the button battery is?
Exactly, so we have a nice replacement for where the cell battery is. Nice contacts, works well. And again, the rubber was only a 1/16 of an inch thick. We used to use 1/8 thick, we found it was too much. So now we have a nice contact for our batteries. The battery box, we'll twist this up a little bit just to make it neat. Then we use 3M mount tape.
That light just along the battery.
So this 3M
Yeah.
mount tape, we found is great tape.
A lot
Anything
more
around
inch
mount
and double A's than.
permanently,
yeah,
but it
20,
also
30
comes
button
apart
battery.
fairly easily. So we'll get 2 strips of this. We'll put down 1 strip, actually cut this in half. Put down 1 strip and then another strip on top of it with this mount tape. And we'll stick it on just like that. Actually have this twisted up a little bit more. It's neat. And we'll stick it on just like that. The reason we put 2 layers of tape underneath there is because we got these screws here and we want to bring it out just a little bit. With that on there, it's a nice permanent. They don't come off hardly at all. But if you needed to, you can grab this and twist. You can be 2 years later, grab this and twist, and it'll come off and you can peel the stuff off.
And then the mounting of this onto the telescope tube, how do you permanently keep that from coming undone?
Yeah, so that we don't do permanently.
You second it?
Okay. So our end cap, we drill a 2-inch hole into the dust cover. We have these nice little end plugs. Drill a hole in there. And this will be tied off with a knot right here. The string comes down, loops through the end cap, and another knot there. So that we now have kind of a grab to pull that off. Pull this end cap off. And this will go down and tie on to the base of the scope. So now that's all attached to the scope no matter what. Then on the eyepiece, we do the same thing. We'll put a knot in there. We won't seal this off because it might touch the lens, so we just leave that loose and fuzzy. All these other ends will seal off with the heating iron. And then, so the eyepiece cover gets, and then we'll tie off down to the eyepiece assembly.
Right. And you've replaced the 2 eyepieces that comes with it with a single.
With a single zoom lens.
I think that's it. So I showed you all this detail to sort of demonstrate for you that it's not rocket science. It's the kind of do-it-yourself stuff that I'm sure many of us do on more weekends than we care to admit to try to get things working right. So just to point out some of the key changes that take place. So first of all, there are these strings that hold these pieces together. They cut out, this is so that you're not using the full aperture when there's a bright moon. You won't need a moon filter because you're cutting down all the light. The replacement battery pack, that's one of the more involved things. The button screws to permanently keep this 8x24 Celestron zoom eyepiece in place. That zoom lens gives you up to 56 power with this telescope, which is enough to see the rings of Saturn and pretty good detail on the moon. And then all of the stickers that they have down here. It takes, I would say, probably about 2 hours of effort per telescope to do these conversions. Here's a couple of things close up. He mentioned the lock nets on the bottom in the place of the collimation screws. You know, these are given to libraries where all kinds of curious hands handle these telescopes, and you want to make them functional but bulletproof at the same time.
People take these out like a book.
Yep.
Yeah, you check them out like a book
Yeah.
for a week at a time. Go ahead, Bruce.
And I'll just say that, so my wife and I donated one of those telescopes up there to the Chelmsford Library, and I go in and check on it every couple of months. The library themselves, they change the batteries in the finder and they check it out. The last time I went with Bernie Kozicki, we had 2 telescopes up there. We didn't even have to collimate everything. The program itself, the New Hampshire guys, they just figured this out to make this an idiot-proof, tamper-proof telescope. It really, really works.
And the concept here is that you place them in a library that's near one of us, right? So that we can periodically go in and check on it and make sure it's still working okay. The New Hampshire has the website of the club has this exhaustive how-to manual that takes you step by step through all the procedures that you saw, just like that. This is a close-up of that red dot finder modification with the little plates that you saw. Here's the fanny pack he was talking about. It comes with a red light headband and everything that you need. There's a moon map that's on it as a sticker. And so a crew to do these modifications can be anywhere from, say, about a half a dozen people, as you saw there, to a couple of dozen people. And everyone has a job. Somebody's soldering the leads for the red dot finder. Somebody's doing the epoxying of the screws in the mirror cell. Somebody's running little star charts through a what's that word I'm looking for?
Laminator.
Thank you very much. A laminator. So that and somebody's assembling and somebody does the collimation. It's a team effort by lots of people. So why should we want to do this, right? Why? I mean, they're obviously very successful at it. And I think that especially with the great work that Rich and the outreach people are doing, I think there's a new enthusiasm for new kinds of outreach. First of all, as I mentioned, the libraries in this immediate area are underserved. Boston Public Library, for example, has 25 branches. It's 25 telescopes that could be in the hands of folks. It targets ideal demographic groups. These are people who are checking these out because they're interested in astronomy. It's a way to reach those people, to give them a truly functioning quality telescope. We've all come across people who have a telescope and say, we've got a telescope. I say, I bet it's a long, skinny white tube on a wooden tripod. Invariably, right? This is a lot more portable. It's a great way to promote the ATMoB itself, extend our brand, and these mod parties are fun for everyone. I don't know if you saw it there, but there's jobs for everyone. If you're mechanically inclined, great. If you're organizationally inclined, great. If you like doing collimation, great. Your whole family can come, kids can come, new members especially. It's a great way for our newer members in the company of veterans to get comfortable with the notion of telescopes and how they work. And so I think there are a lot of reasons that we'd want to, and I think another question then is what's needed to get started. I envision, if we were to get into this, to have a sort of core of maybe 3 people as a core team. One person would be responsible for canvassing all the libraries, promoting the idea, getting commitments for the telescope, handling the money and the orders. The way they do it is that the New Hampshire program is pretty mature. There aren't that many libraries left in New Hampshire that don't have these telescopes. And so their mod parties have dropped down to like 1 or 2 a year, and they did 8 at this one session. So they've collected these commitments ahead of time, and when they get critical mass, they order the telescopes from Orion, which they get a small discount for. Orion understands that this has become a big deal. They order the Celestron zoom eyepieces in bulk. Pete and his crew, they have bins full of nuts and screws and stuff that they buy in bulk. It's all there. So there would be one person handling the getting the orders in, if you will. I think there would be a second person who would be responsible for the procurement of the telescopes and the hardware that would be needed, and make sure that that's all there present. And then a third person would be sort of the gang, the boss, right? The pit boss, who is making sure that everything is running smoothly. And I would think that we'd also want to coordinate with other clubs. Not just the Aldrich Society to make nice with them, right? But you can imagine like the North Shore Club and the South Shore Club, and coordinating this in a way so that we actually blanket the whole state with these telescopes so that they're available. as I said, there'd be a mod party coordinator, and the location. It's interesting that what the New Hampshire Club does is they have no one place to do this. And I would actually submit to you that the Clubhouse is not the right place to do this for a couple of reasons. One is that you don't have a lot of table space out there in wide open settings, and also it's hard for a lot of people to get to. And if the notion is to make this a growth activity for the membership of the club, you want it someplace where lots of people can get to it, maybe even by public transportation. What New Hampshire does is they tap some member who works for some company that has, a cafeteria or something that's open on the weekend, like the New England Sci-Tech.
I will volunteer New England Sci-Tech.
Right? Exactly. That could be the hub. And are you accessible by transport?
I don't know, because I don't.
But anyway, that would be a great setting, right? It's not too far for everybody to drive to. It is impossible to find, but that's besides the point. And the last thing it would need is a commitment by the club that we really want to do this. And it's more than just a commitment of time. It's a commitment of concept you might want, I noted, Eileen, that our balance has been like $51,000 for, a very long time. Maybe you want to commit $1,000 or $2,000 a year to get a dozen telescopes out into the community for libraries that maybe can't afford it, or maybe one of you wants to donate a telescope for your hometown library. That's how it often happens. That's what Bruce and Rich did. And so that's sort of all I've got on that. And Tom, I don't know where you want to take this conversation from here, but I know you've kind of danced around this a little bit. I happen to think it's a fantastic program. As I said, Bruce and I have both participated in these modification parties. They are fun in and of themselves. It's a Saturday morning for 2 or 3 hours. Somebody goes and gets pizza, and you end up with all of these telescopes ready to go to put in young and old eager hands who want to explore the sky. So, Paul, I don't know if you want to go ahead, Paul.
How much does Orion actually hit the group up for each scope?
So they listed $200 a piece.
Yeah.
And my understanding, there had been a nonprofit on the North Shore that was buying them in bulk at some sort of educational discount. That doesn't exist anymore, at least for the New Hampshire Club. But Pete told me that they do get a small discount. It might be like 10%. As he said, the total of all the parts, the books, the fanny pack, the headbands, the battery cases, the zoom eyepieces, and the telescope is about $325 per unit. One other thing I meant to mention while I was up there talking to Pete, I said, so Pete, suppose we here want to get started. Would you come down and run our first mod party for us? And he said, absolutely. So
another question, what's the aperture F number?
So it's a f4.5, and it's 450 millimeters. That's 140. It's like f4, I guess, something around that.
F4.
How
rugged is the Newtonian diagonal holder?
I own. So I actually afterward or whenever. This is one of the actual modified telescopes. This was mine. I actually have one of these things. So Paul, you can come and take a look at it. It's a 3-stalk diagonal with rods. So it's not plastic, it's metal. It's actually pretty sturdy.
It's got 11 years of history behind it.
Yeah.
Ruggedness in libraries.
Kelly, the other nice thing too about the New Hampshire group being so well established in this program is that a lot of the legwork is already done.
Right.
Where do you get the caps? Where do the parts list is already there.
I think they offer clubs across the nation a plug-and-play solution. Right. Now, some clubs have taken and they've done their own little mods on it. For example, I know that one club, they get a big, they leave the hardware here as it comes, and they just put a big plastic cap over the end so that little hands can't get at it. It's really sort of discouraged things. But
they purchased that, or it's 3D printed?
The cap, I think they purchased it. Pete's been pretty handy at finding sources for things economically. One of the things that they invested in, he's got a 10-inch wide laminator that just sits there, and so instead of having to go to Staples with this stuff, that was my job today at the mod party. I was feeding the laminator and cutting up the little star charts and stuff. I guess that was all they would trust me with.
Mine was soldering the battery clips.
You were soldering the battery
Good at
clips.
that.
Kelly, just a question, what holds that battery, the new leads in place? Is there a cover for that, or?
I don't think so. Actually, let me take a quick
The
look
same
here.
way the original button batteries put in there.
Actually, in this case, yes, they put the original cap back on. I guess they just sort of hog out a little spot for the wires.
Sure.
But you know, if any of you have these things, that little cap on the button battery, the pins on that break, you got to be really careful with that. So.
Years ago, I used to do this for Burlington High School, and actually I got more interest in the middle school. However, when I was doing the high school, they liked to use my primary mirror as an ashtray.
Good.
No more.
Well, I'm glad you brought up high school, because I think, and we have a wonderful example sitting up here. I think we have an opportunity to take this to a level that none of the other clubs that are doing it do, which is there are plenty of high schools in the greater Boston area that have astronomy classes, and that means they have an astronomy instructor. And I can imagine having this be a two-way street where maybe, the first couple of times we'll do these mod parties ourselves, but maybe we do a mod party at a high school involving the students in that astronomy class, right? And then the telescope goes to, there'll be a good case for donating from the club. Can you imagine the telescope being available for checkout at the high school, at their library, for these students who are in the club? And then in return, that teacher and those students will come and attend our meetings, right? And we'll start this new generation interleaving with us older folks and passing the torch, so to speak. And I don't know of any club across the country that's doing that way. But I know, because I taught at Dexter Southfield, I know that there are plenty of high schools in this area with astronomy programs.
Go ahead.
Hi. So I'm from Boston School, and we are from the Boston School Astronomy Club.
Yes!
Yeah. And
Would you like this?
Yeah, we would love to. I mean, actually, we have the telescope from our school. It's actually, there's a plaque on it saying it's only from Stephen Hawking, but we're trying to get it to work. So like that was my goal of coming to this meeting. So, but after hearing your idea, I feel like that would be great. I mean, my high school, the Boston School, doesn't have an astronomy class yet, but we're starting from like the astronomy club. We're trying to promote astronomy and the interest in astronomy.
So you have a club of
Yes.
students here, and you're here tonight, right?
Yes.
You want to all stand up so we can see who's here? All right. So, how many of you have your own telescope?
Right here.
It's
Well, this is the club, but we
That's
have
the-
the telescopes.
all right. You have a telescope too?
It's a kid's telescope that I.
All right. So imagine this is in your library, and not just you, but all the other kids who are cool and interested in your school could check it out and keep it for a week, right? I think it has a lot of potential. Thank you for coming. I'm glad you're here. Yeah, we'll find out what's going on with your telescope before we're done tonight.
Okay, thank you very much.
Another comment, Kelly. A very smart astronomy instructor who keeps kids up all night, and then they don't have to come to school the next day until.
I want to be your student. So, I mean, I don't know.
So let me give an anecdote. So I live in Acton, and I knew an Eagle Scout candidate that was looking for a program to do. And there's only so many trails you can build, and shelters from rain and things like that these kids do. So one of the suggestions that we came up with was to build some of these scopes, and we utilized the plans from New Hampshire, and he raised the funds himself for 3 telescopes.
How long ago was this?
This was 4 years ago. Actually, he approached the library and had a little rough time at first. They weren't sure they really wanted to host telescopes, and they thought it was going to be a big deal and a lot of work. And it took real work for him to convince them to take these telescopes. And so, as part of his Eagle Scout award, he had to actually procure the funds, actually do the build outs on them. And what he did was he got all the scouts involved, and Bernie Kozicki actually drove a lot of that. He did a fantastic job. And in the end, they were able to provide 3 telescopes to the Acton Public Library. And they're still in operation. Bernie goes by and checks them every couple of months. And he's found the same thing Bruce did, in that they're pretty much bulletproof. And they're always subscribed. So it's a great program. I'm very supportive of it. I think it'd be an awesome outreach program. And I like the idea of it not necessarily being Clubhouse based, because we have a lot of efforts that are going on there. But there's other things we could do outside of the Clubhouse. So I think that's a fantastic idea. And we just so happen to have a budget meeting coming up with the board, and maybe this could be a proposal that we think about funding a couple of telescopes and providing them to, you know, an organization that maybe can't afford it, or actually use them to get into these kind of markets. So I think it's a great idea.
At the suggestion of creating yet another committee, I mean, one of the things you might want to do is form a core group of people who would like to see this pushed forward, including me. I would certainly be on that committee to you know, maybe figure out what the next steps are. And obviously the budgetary support would be huge. There is some initial startup, right? Like Pete, you go up there and he's got these giant bins of all these long screws and the epoxy and the little, you know, the punched out little rubber spacers and things like that. But it occurred to me that we might even be able to subcontract with him. You know, pay him and they've already got the infrastructure for getting all that stuff. They could provide it, and we could reimburse them or something.
So I guess, does anyone else have any other comments or suggestions or ideas?
Well, I wonder if Mario did a class in Linfield years ago. How did that work out?
Well, that was different. Janet Matty got a NASA grant, $5,000 actually. People will donate for this kind of stuff all the time. Had no problem getting money. But mine was different. I had 18 kids grind 9 mirrors. And in fact, we bought the materials from the club. And they did a great job. They made 9 telescopes. I did the mechanical parts for them. They ground all the mirrors. 6 of them were donated to the school. 3 were kept by some kids. And as far as I know, it's still being used in Linfield. So, you know, this could be a lifetime thing.
Is there a cash flow issue, and particularly if the libraries are paying for it? In other words, you have to have some money to purchase it and get it set up, and then you get reimbursed?
You know, it might be. I mean, in town, like in Chelmsford, we have these things called enterprise funds, where like you would have a pot of money that's $2,000. And so all of your purchases come out of that, and all the money from the libraries go into that. And over time, you know, it sort of stays the same, but it gives you that buffer for that library that's maybe a little bit late in paying. Or that you've got a commitment, but they haven't actually paid for it, or can't, or won't until you deliver the telescope. And you know, at the end of the day, compared to the cost of a Paramount, I mean, this is pretty small number stuff. $300 per, you know, $350 per telescope. Even if you were in the hole for 3 of them, that would only be $1,000. So only, but I mean, it's not a huge chunk of money. Yes.
I stepped out of the room for a minute to get the Christmas break.
Oh, good. Well, Bruce, congratulations. You are.
They're in charge.
The question I have that I hope hasn't been answered before is there a script or something that New Hampshire's developed to approach libraries, or do we just walk in?
So it's a great question. One of the things that I have found out is that these library folks talk to each other, right? You might not know this, but all of the libraries, because the Apollo 11 anniversary, decided that their theme for summer presentations was going to be space and astronomy. I'm going off to Chile for the eclipse. I'm coming back on July 8th, and in the next 2 weeks, I am giving 9 public talks at libraries in 2 weeks. And so I think this is a case where the libraries that don't have them will contact the ones that have them and say, is this a good thing to do? And you know, invariably, it's thumbs up. Even the Chelmsford one, which has been in circulation now for about, I don't know, 5 years, Bruce? Since
About that, yeah.
it was 2013-ish. They're still being checked out regularly, especially in the summer.
When we go to, yeah, we have to usually reserve twice, a couple of weeks in advance to let them know that we're gonna go through maintenance because they're checked out almost all.
I had to go to the other Chelmsford library because the one closest to me, it was checked out. So I think the answer to your question is that unlike your Eagle Scout, I think the skids are greased on this, and I think this will be a pretty easy sell. Now, maybe not in downtown, in the Boston Public Library. That would be a pretty big and audacious, catch. But we can start nibbling in from the suburbs, Arlington and Lexington and so forth.
Just funds? Well, listen, when I did that thing in Linfield that Paul brought up, we got a grant, but we had parents wanting to donate money, left and right. We said we didn't need it, okay? But my point is, if you just put a simple ad in a newspaper, your town newspaper, you're gonna pay for more than one telescope, guaranteed.
Well, I suspect there are a bunch of people in this room,
I know that.
right, who would fork over the $350 so that their town library would have one of these
This is
telescopes.
the kind of thing people like to donate to, is my point.
You get a little plaque with your name on it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Kelly, doing kind of feedback, so that users, whether it's the high school or the library, could give comments on what they liked about the scope or how they felt about the program. Maybe that would help us sell it. Those comments help us sell it to the high schools or the libraries, and maybe even figure out ways to improve the program.
Yeah, so as the the putative head of the contact the library side of this, I could easily imagine going to some of the libraries in New Hampshire or Chelmsford or some of the ones at the Aldrich Club. I think making peace with them might be tough. That might be the toughest sell. But surely, I mean, I'm sure we can get testimonials, so to speak, from the librarians themselves on how they perhaps approached it apprehensively, but were sold by the time they actually got it and let the program run a while. I have really not heard very much down, and the fact that this is spread, if you go to librarytelescope.org, you can do a pull-down list for the locations of telescopes in every state, right? And that's how I found out, because I thought I was going to pull down Chelmsford. I was going to pull down Massachusetts and expected to see 2 telescopes, the ones in Chelmsford. Now I know there's 3 inactive. No, there were 100 telescopes that the Aldrich Society had done. Like, had any of you heard that? It's pretty astounding to me.
We had somebody from Aldrich come talk to us a few years ago.
I see.
They were here.
They didn't have 100.
No, but they were here.
And they didn't convince you then.
We're slow sometimes.
Steve, did you have a comment or question?
Me?
Steve?
Only that we now do have a little space at the clubhouse, excuse me, if you'd like to do a pilot program. We do have a couple of tables in the old grinding room we can set up if you want to bring it all together just to try it out. I'm talking 2 or 3 or 4 telescopes, maybe 7 or 8 people. Beyond that, it would be a problem. But if you just want a place to go to try it out, you feel free to use that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? So after Kelly's given a great talk and a great advocate for this program, does anyone here have an interest in participating? So I think that's... I've got your name, don't worry.
So if we bought wine to the mod party, would anybody else?
But you wouldn't be able to hold a soldering gun. You got one.
I certainly wouldn't want to be the one to do the collimation.
So I
guess that's what it really comes down to is we need some volunteers to help out with a program like that because, like I said earlier, all the legwork has been done by the New Hampshire group, and it's just a matter of getting the word out and getting people together to do this. That's that we just need people to volunteer to do it.
So one way to do this, right, if taking Steve's cue there, suppose the budget allocated $2,000, enough for 6 telescopes, and you just went out and bought 6 telescopes, right, and you brought Pete down with his bag of nuts and bolts and stuff, and you had a sort of dry run party, and you completed a half dozen scopes, and so you have a half dozen ready to go for your first 6 libraries that wanted to participate. They would not have to wait; they could get the telescopes right away. We would start to build a knowledge base of how to do it, right? And that would be the springboard toward maybe a bigger program.
And then ask them to donate something, some special.
Yeah.
Yeah, your biggest, as far as going to the libraries, any library that's got them, the librarian or the head, that's going to be your biggest advocate of this. Yeah, certainly in Chelmsford it is.
Why don't you ask how many people would be willing to come to a mod party, be part of the mod party?
Who would be willing to come to a mod party? Well, there you go.
You get a higher responsibility.
Even up there, I saw some hands.
And how do people feel about different venues? Maybe having one at the Clubhouse, we could do it someplace local. I like that idea too.
I think even approach one of the libraries that might be interesting. Let us use their public meeting room to do it. There's all kinds of things.
You might even be able to do it in this room.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no one's not technically responsible. It is not.
Because they would support it too.
I would want to get there on public transportation.
Yes, on public transportation, that would be a very good idea. Not only especially for if I don't know, it could be a new member icebreaker, right? There are a lot of ways you could spin this.
Sure. Well, how I'd like to go forward is I'd like to put together a committee, and as president, I can do that. I can just have an ad hoc committee and start one. So if someone is interested in playing a role in that committee, and as Kelly suggested, maybe it's 3 people that we could have involved, and I'm going to guarantee that Kelly's going to at least be involved as one member. So it's a great way to, meet Kelly, and he's a great resource in a lot of different things. So, beg your pardon?
Just teasing.
Yeah, I know.
Right, yep. So
I do know which end the eyepiece goes in. That's okay.
I'd be willing to help get it started.
I'm in. All right, so we've got 3 people right there, and so we're
first meeting July 2nd.
So I'm pretty excited about that. So why don't you be on the lookout for notices going forward, and they're going to work very closely with the outreach committee. I'm going to assume that the outreach is going to have oversight on this and help to perpetuate it over time. I think that's.
How do we get the money in the budget?
We have to write a proposal and we vote on it at the meeting coming up.
Okay, because we've only got a week to do that, right?
That's right.
The Aldrich Club, a lot of times they do like a launch party at the library. It's a good outreach opportunity.
Right.
To sort of attract people that are interested and have other telescopes set up, because we only have one library, so it's a great time to build.
You could do in conjunction with a modest star party, at that library.
The library would host it.
Right.
Hey, Kelly, I just went on the website, and I live in Somerville, and Aldrich has a telescope at the Somerville.
Yeah. They've left us a few table crumbs to go after.
But they only have one.
They only have one. Somerville is huge.
Yeah.
And they have more than one library, right?
Right, we have more than one library.
Yeah. So there's what, that again is going to be a big there's going to be a big advocacy because they've got it in one place and not the other. So.
Great. Okay. So we're going to leave it at that, and it is right now
9:24.
9:24. Kelly has graciously offered to give us a short presentation on Starlink. If people are interested, maybe I'll have people raise their hands if they want to stick around.
Like another 15 minutes.
And if you don't,
the rest you can turn around and face the back of the line.
So thank you again, Kelly.
All right, great. All right, so here we go. This is the great menace that is facing astronomy. a lot of us were caught by surprise. As early as 2015, SpaceX announced its intention to launch a constellation of satellites to provide internet service, kind of like the GPS system or the Iridium system, but not just but global. And so let's see, I think I skipped one. Let's go back. Okay, so the satellites look like this after they're launched. They have a flat plane, much like an Iridium's do. This was the first launch on May 24th. This was recorded by a Dutch amateur astronomer. They were launched into a low orbit, and they were pretty darn obvious as they went across the sky. They all come with krypton thrusters to boost them into higher orbits, but initially it was quite a conga line and an arresting sight across the sky. Bob King has a nice article about this on the Sky Telescope website. Not only were they clustered together, but they flared too. And this initial launch they were sort of in the magnitude 2, 3, 4, 5. The flares were as bright as magnitude 2. And that wouldn't be so bad if there were just a few of them, but this is the plan. This is a schematic. Basically, let's say you're here in New York City, and you want to communicate with somebody in London. So you beam up to one of these satellites flying overhead, and then it uses laser beams to chain that signal to the satellite that happens to be over London, and then the receiver is there. You obviously need a lot of satellites to be able to do that, and so this is their original plan, is filed with the FCC, was to have the initial shell. They have all these orbital planes, 53 degrees inclination, which means it's over basically all of the populated parts of the world, right? Just like the space station can be seen pretty much everywhere. Oops, with 50 satellites at each plane at an altitude, I'm going to go back to that, at an altitude of 1,100 feet. Well, that's not too bad. They're not that big, right? They might be telescopically visible, but they wouldn't be in your face. But then SpaceX changed their plan to bring the satellites down to 550 kilometers. This is just the first phase. And the reason for that is that's 550 kilometers is a little bit higher than the space station, which makes they will self-re-enter after a while. Well, that was just the first phase, right? This is a simulation using Stellarium of what those satellites, just the ones I showed you, that's the first part of the first phase, at 550, this is what they would be looking like going over your head from the latitude of Long Island. So they're like an armada of TIE fighters from Star Wars crisscrossing your sky. The lower they are in altitude, the less likely they will appear in the middle of the night because they have to be illuminated by sunlight. The higher the altitude, the fainter they are, but they'll be up all night, right? Well, this is the completion of the first phase. That is, these are the ones that are at 500 at several planes. This is phase 1. This is about 4,000 satellites. 2 months ago, SpaceX got permission from the FCC to launch phase 2 in addition to phase 1. This is phase 1. There's the number of satellites, the orbital inclinations, the orbital altitudes. These ones really high up, not such a big deal. You total that up, that's 4,000. Here's phase 2. An additional 7,500 satellites. Look at the altitude. This is kilometers. That's lower than the space station. Oh my God. This is going to be an issue. A big, big issue. And these are the completion dates for those phases. So we're talking about 8 to 10 years from now. So this is what we face. This was a picture taken in Florida of a NGC group in Canaspanatisi off the end of the Big Dipper's handle. This is a supernova in one of those galaxies. This was taken 2 weeks later when the Armada passed through the field of view, as seen from Lowell Observatory.
Wow.
And visually, it'll be a nuisance, but imagine telescopically, what are you going to do to get rid of these in your astrophotos? If he's shaking his head.
Maybe the depth of long exposures.
I'm sorry? It'll be the death of long exposures. Okay, so here, this is my sort of my last slide. Although SpaceX has not announced any further launches for 2019, they have gone on record as saying that they plan at least 6 more this year on their way. This was sort of their first test. Now, it's also the case that Elon Musk was taken somewhat aback by all of the negative publicity he got. The AAS, the IAU have gone on record as opposed to this. Sky and Telescope, we have an op-ed in the works. And
It was the client.
I'm sorry?
Mine was the client.
And he said, there is a greater good here. He's providing internet for the world. All right, that's a good thing. But I think he's going to work on ways to try to make them less obvious, maybe some sort of anti-reflective coating or somehow, I don't know. But he's not a dumb guy, and yet he said, well, they won't be as bright as the space station, which is much bigger and has lights. It does?
It doesn't have light.
It doesn't have light. Anyway, I gave this talk yesterday in San Diego. So that's sort of what I wanted, as sort of an alert to keep your eye out for this. I don't know why we didn't see this coming. It was announced as something they were going to do about 3 or 4 years ago.
We have lots of satellites. Who knew it would be like that?
It wasn't until April. Well, first of all, it was always going to be 4,000. But it wasn't until April that it jumped to 12,000. And it's not just visual astronomy, it's going to be a radio problem too, for radio astronomy, because it's at multiple wavelengths. And so this is my sort of cautionary tale. Something we should all be paying close attention to.
So is there any reaction from other countries?
Well, I'm not sure. I haven't heard of any. Other countries arguably stand to benefit a lot, right? This will bring internet. And if you look at the numbers of how much this will improve the quality of internet communication, it's actually much faster than what we have now and much more robust.
Why do we need it?
Because, as I just said, it's much faster and more reliable.
What could we possibly need faster communication? We already got 10 times what we need.
You can stream cat videos from the other planet.
Fred, I think we all remember when we were debating whether or not to get a 10 megabyte hard drive on our computers. There's always a need for more, right?
Yeah, but at that time we didn't have tons of dark fiber sitting in the ocean.
That's true. Yes?
I've also read that there are at least 4 other companies that are considering similar satellite web.
Yeah, it turns out that there's nothing against the law for launching as many satellites as you can. Or want to.
Well, I was going to say, it's like the Wild West up there.
Yeah.
There's no policing them.
The expected effect on professional astronomical observatories, Chile and
That's a really great question. So unlike light pollution, which is localized, right? You can get away from light pollution if you go to a mountaintop. You will not be able to get away from these. Some of the inclinations are basically polar. Where's that? Right? These are polar.
Yeah.
So there's no escaping. No escaping. Anyway, I just wanted to scare you a little bit. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks. I'm sorry?
What is the government organization?
FCC. FCC. Federal Communications. And they applied, for example, this phase 2, the ones that are low altitude, they applied 2 years ago, and just in April did the FCC approve that system.
Well, but the FCC is not in a position to approve that because they don't have all of the technical knowledge that they need.
Well,
and
apparently,
typically in that case, if you go to court, it's turned down. The court will throw it up.
I don't know what to tell you, Fred. It's the FCC. governs the, for example, it governs the allocation of wavelength frequencies, wavelengths and frequencies for telecommunications. I think they actually are the authority in this.
No, because if it affects some other aspect covered by another government organization, you have to pass all of them.
Well,
This would have to pass
look,
3 or 4 of them.
we could pass a new regulation against this, but we would have to get rid of two.
No, what I'm saying is, this already violates a lot of other regulations, not FCC ones. That's what the problem
If you could
is.
figure out what those are, it would be a great defense.
I know
against-
Elon Musk knows them, and he's been very quiet.
So Kelly, what can we do?
What can we do is...
Bottom line.
Well, actually, I think one good approach might be to contact Ed Markey. We as a club could send an email or a letter to Elon Musk, expressing our disgust with this.
That would have no effect.
But it would have no effect. I actually think that this has probably come to Ed Markey. Markey has been a long time advocate of communications issues. And since he's our senator, that might be of some use. Maybe a letter from the club.
The first thing is to get an attorney who can tell you who beyond the FCC has to approve this. There's got to be 3 or 4 or half a dozen U.S. government organizations that would have to pass on this with a good attorney. That's the way to stop it immediately.
I don't know for sure, but I can imagine that's exactly what someone at the AAS is doing right now.
And it's only a matter of time before another national government tries to put their own thing up. So
Yeah, remember, that's just the U.S.
Wait,
what's AAS?
General is their interface organization. Satellites in general, so they...
All right, well, thanks, folks. Refreshments again, and thank you very much.